We often speak with human resource professionals or other representatives of our contact organizations, especially when they're planning what they anticipate might be a higher risk or volatile termination meeting. And that might be a situation where an employee has been violent in the workplace, maybe they have made threats against the workplace or coworkers. Sometimes it's rumored they keep a gun in their vehicle. It can be any type of higher risk situation. And that's especially anxiety provoking for those that are planning that type of meeting. So we partner with our contacts throughout that process. One of the first things we really want to do is help them voice their concerns and then also help them be ready to walk into that type of meeting. Since it is potentially an emotionally charged situation, the more effectively they're able to regulate their emotions and their responses, the more manageable the meeting is going to be. So from there, then we look at some of the practical planning that needs to happen. We want to make sure that human resources, management, and legal counsel are all on the same page with regard to separating employment. And then we look at practical planning such as where will the meeting be held? What's the seating arrangement? How does that relate to where the exits are? Again, that's a safety matter. If they have security, can security be nearby and ready to respond if needed? And if they don't have securities, there's some other backup plan that they can make arrangements for. And then we also look at who's going to be in this meeting, and we do recommend that it is more than one person. If there is a manager or an HR contact who has a good rapport with that employee, that can be helpful as well, because that can help to de-escalate a situation if things do get a little more heated. And then when they're walking into that type of meeting, we want them to be able to create a situation where the employee does feel heard and understood, because that can minimize the potential for escalation. They also need to balance that, though, with monitoring that employee's nonverbal cues so that they can start to tell if that employee is getting a little more heated. And then also balance that with sticking to their message. They're going to have key things they need to communicate, such as the reason for the termination. They're going to want to talk about any expectations they have moving forward. Can that employee return to the workplace? What do they expect for further contact? How do they want to drive or direct future communication with that employee? So there are a lot of details that may need to be attended to. So they have to balance allowing the employee to respond with making sure that they are able to communicate the key things that need to happen. And no HR contact wants to have to be in the position of conducting this type of meeting, but the feedback that we get is that it is really helpful to have a partner throughout the process. Professionals that are there to provide you with some guidance, some support, and we work with our organizations throughout the process, both for management and HR, but also the affected work group, if this has had a significant impact on them, and the former employee. We can provide support there as well. It's just nice not to have to be alone throughout that process. When you do communicate this with an employee, you're likely to see reactions potentially even as soon as you call that employee to your office. They may know that this is coming or have anticipated that, depending on the circumstances. So you may start to see an employee appearing to be a bit more anxious. You may notice changes in terms of some of their nonverbal cues. They may become flushed. They may talk a little bit more rapidly, or they may become very quiet. All of those are very normal things. What we have to remember with this is that this is very difficult news for anyone to receive, and so they may become a bit flooded with their own emotions in that moment, which means it's going to be harder for them to take some of what you have to say in and absorb that. So that's all very normal. That's why it's helpful to sometimes repeat yourself or to provide things in writing if it's appropriate. If you start to see someone getting much more agitated, if their face becomes red, if they're balling their fists up, if they are raising their voice, if they stand or taking more aggressive posturing, that's where you potentially can become much more concerned. And you're going to want to do some things to de-escalate that situation. Pay attention to keeping your reactions calm. Try try not to match their escalated voice, so keep your voice at a normal level, and try not to match their aggressive posturing. But if you do need to, be very clear about what you're seeing. Respond to them in the moment. Let them know that you're noticing that their voice is rising and they may be having a little trouble composing themselves. Offer to give them a moment before you continue the conversation. If they can't do that, you can wrap up that meeting if needed for safety's sake. It is helpful to try to allow that employee to feel heard, for them to be able to voice their perspective, but you may find out early on whether that employee is going to continue to try to state their case. If you're they may continue to try to do that as long as you're willing to listen. If that's the case, then you again want to make sure that you have hit on those key messages that you needed to attend to: the reason for the termination, your expectations moving forward, benefits, whatever those key pieces are. And if that employee is going to continue to try to state their case, at some point you may need to become a broken record, get back to your message, and work to wrap things up. At that point they've just cycled through their message over and over, they're just continuing to plead for their employment, that's when you can say that you need to wrap up this meeting. You can make sure you're responding to who they can be in contact with if they have further questions. You can either start to stand up, let them know that you're going to be walking them out, start wrapping things up and taking those steps that you're going to take, and communicating those things as you're doing them to help get that employee moving and out the door if needed. Notifying staff can be difficult. They're going to know that this person is no longer with the company, but if you don't provide them with as much information as you're able to, they're going to naturally just fill in the gaps. And oftentimes when we, as humans, fill in the gaps, it's not accurate. So you're going to want to go back to the group, acknowledge to them that this person is no longer with the organization. Acknowledge that you have limitations with regard to how much you can share with the group, and they may know that, but you have to call that out because they are going to be pulling for more information. Let them know that you need to respect that former employee's privacy as you would any of their privacy as well, but also make sure that they understand your door is open. They can come to you if they have questions. You'll do the best you can to answer those questions and respond to their needs. And if there is any reassurance that you can provide with regard to whether there are further layoffs, further terminations, if that's not planned and you can acknowledge that to them, it can be helpful to do that because they're naturally going to be curious and worried if this is somehow going to affect them as well. And then communicate whatever plans you may have in place for that employee's position, how to handle that workload. Those are the natural questions that are going to come next. Handling the personal belongings of someone who's been terminated is going to be something you want to keep in line with previous protocol or procedure. So an organization sometimes has a policy. If they walk someone out, they may then mail their belongings to them at a later point, or they may allow them back into the work group area or back to their workstation to gather their belongings. If you're concerned about safety, it's best, or an employee's volatility or emotionality, then it's best not to allow them back into that workspace at that point in time. But talk with them about whatever arrangements you're going to make for getting their belongings to them. That may be making sure you have an appropriate address so you can mail belongings. It may also be making arrangements so that that employee can come back at a later point, maybe after the workday when the work group isn't there, so as not to escalate that situation within the work group. Whatever arrangements you have, just ensure that you're communicating that very clearly with that former employee.